The Whispering Hour. The small town of Larkspur was a place people tended to forget, nestled between rolling hills and the kind of woods that seemed to swallow sound. It was a town more defined by its silence than its people. But the silence didn't bring peace. No, it suffocated. Jade Monroe had come to Larkspur for the same reason she'd come to many places before. She was running from herself, running from the void that seemed to stretch endlessly behind her. She rented a modest house on the edge of town, just far enough to be isolated, but not so far that she couldn't still catch the faint echo of a life she once knew. Jade had no family left, at least, none she wanted to think about. Her past was a collection of blurry memories, most of them distant and painful, the kind of memories that hovered just on the edge of recognition, threatening to come into focus, but never quite doing so. They were fragments, like pieces of glass in a shattered mirror, jagged and sharp, reflecting distorted versions of who she had been. The house she rented was old, maybe too old. Its wooden floors creaked under her weight, the windows were drafty, and the walls were thin, as though the house were trying to whisper its secrets through every crack. But Jade didn't care. The house was quiet enough to drown out the voices in her head, or so she thought. The first night she stayed in Larkspur, Jade lay in bed, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan. The house groaned occasionally, as old houses do, but it wasn't the house that unsettled her. It was the silence of the town. It pressed down on her like a weight, suffocating, until she found herself awake in the middle of the night, eyes wide and unblinking. Something was wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it. The stillness was too complete. There was no wind, no animals rustling outside, no distant hum of electricity. Just nothing. Jade sat up and listened. For the first time since she'd arrived, she heard it, a faint whisper. It was barely perceptible at first, like a soft murmur carried by the wind. Her heart thudded in her chest. She turned her head slowly, eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. The whisper came again, this time a little clearer, a little more distinct. Jade, her breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. It was hers, but it couldn't be. It was coming from somewhere else. She jumped out of bed and rushed to the window, throwing open the curtains. There was nothing, just a long stretch of darkened street and the dense line of trees beyond the yard. The whisper came again. Jade. This time, it was closer. So close. In fact, it seemed to come from inside her own skull. The words were soft, almost pleading, but there was something else, too. A sense of urgency, a need for something she couldn't understand. She slammed the window shut, heart racing. Her head spun with confusion. It had to be her imagination, right? She was tired. Maybe the stress of moving had gotten to her. It was just the isolation, the unfamiliarity of the town, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. But as the days went by, the whispering didn't stop. It followed her. In the shower, when she made her coffee, when she was out walking the narrow streets of Larkspur. At first, she thought it was just in her head, a trick of exhaustion or anxiety. But then, it started to change. The whispers weren't just calling her name anymore. They were telling her things. They're watching you. One hissed in the silence of the night. Don't go into the woods. Another warned, though Jade wasn't sure if it was a suggestion or a command. Her nerves were frayed. She couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. She started avoiding certain places in the house, the hallway with the cracked mirror, the old wooden door at the back of the house that led to the cellar. There was something about those spaces that made her skin crawl. The whispers had mentioned them, too, but Jade had no intention of giving in to whatever the voice wanted. But one day, when she returned home from a late trip into town, the door to the cellar was open. She had never left it like that. The whispering had grown louder, more insistent, as though the house itself was alive, trying to communicate with her. Go down, it urged. It's time to face the truth. Jade stood frozen in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at the stairs that led down into darkness. The cellar was cold, the air thick with the smell of dust and mold, but something inside her, some deep, buried instinct urged her forward. With a trembling hand, She descended the steps. The cellar was much larger than she had anticipated. The walls were lined with shelves, some empty, others stacked with old, forgotten items, dusty jars, boxes, and what appeared to be the remnants of other people's lives. But it wasn't the objects that caught her attention. It was the mirror. She had never seen it before, and yet it was exactly the same as the one in the hallway upstairs, the cracked mirror that she had always avoided. Jade felt drawn to it, her feet moving of their own accord, until she was standing directly in front of it. Her reflection stared back at her, but there was something wrong with it. The face in the mirror wasn't quite hers. Her eyes were too dark, too empty. The skin seemed to stretch unnaturally across her face, as though something was pressing against it from underneath. And then, the reflection smiled. It wasn't her smile. It was a twisted, distorted grin, stretched wide across her face, that no longer resembled her own. Jade recoiled, but her reflection didn't move. It just stayed there, smiling at her, its eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Jade," the whisper came again, but this time, it was not from behind her or the house. It was from within the mirror. She staggered back, her breath coming in short gasps. The mirror's surface rippled, like water disturbed by a stone, and then, something reached out. A cold, skeletal hand shot from the glass, grabbing her by the wrist with a grip so strong it felt like it would snap her bones. Jade screamed, trying to pull away, but the hand held firm, dragging her forward, toward the glass. And then, the world went black. When Jade awoke, she was lying on the cold cellar floor, the mirror reflecting the ceiling above her. The whispering had stopped, but a new sound lingered in the air, the faintest thrum, like a heartbeat. She tried to sit up but found herself unable to move. The air in the cellar was thick and heavy, pressing down on her chest. Her limbs were frozen, her body locked in place, but her mind was racing. "Welcome back," a voice said, not from the mirror, but from somewhere inside her head. "It's time to remember." And in that moment, the fog of her memory began to clear. She remembered the truth, who she had been, and what she had done. Jade Monroe had not come to Larkspur to escape her past. She had come to Larkspur because she had been running from something far darker, something far more terrifying than anything she had imagined. And now, the house knew. Now, she knew. The whispers were never just in her mind. They had always been there, waiting,